Welcome back, everybody. The last video was a lot of fun, a lot of hard code, and we moved pretty quickly there. Just one example of why this is an advanced course, and we haven't even started the architecture yet. We're still just building Swift UI code here. In the last video, we made custom app alerts, and then we made custom reusable modifiers so that we could now display basically any alert on any screen with literally 1-2 lines of code. In this video, we're going to do the exact same thing, but for showing modals instead of alerts. So in the final version of the app here, when the user clicks on the profile image, we're actually going to display a modal on top of the chat screen. This is going to be the avatar's image, like their profile image. This will be the avatar name, and then this will be the type of avatar that it is. Maybe we actually will add a line here that says like Alpha is an alien playing in the park or something like that. There'll be an X button. And we're also going to build it so that if the user clicks anywhere outside, it's going to dismiss as well. So first we're just going to build it on top of this screen, and then we're going to go ahead and make it reusable. But actually, before we go ahead and build it on top of this screen and display the modal, let's first just build this content that we are going to display. Let's open up the navigator. I'm going to open up our component section here, and I'm going to make one more folder just to call this modals. Yes, they are technically views, but I like just having a separate category for all the modals in my app. Let's create a new file from template. Let's do a Swift UI view, and let's call this the profile modal view, maybe, because it's the avatar's profile, not to be confused with the current user's profile. Maybe not the best name. I need to work on my naming conventions. But in here, let's go ahead and put in a image name. It will be of type string, and let's set it equal to constants.randomImage. Let's go ahead and make image name optional just in case we don't have one. We'll do a title of type string. We'll set it equal to, let's do alpha. We'll do a subtitle of type string, and we'll set this equal to alien. And let's do one more. And let's call this the headline of type string, and we'll set this equal to an alien in the park. Just as an example, let's go ahead and build this component. So I'll challenge you guys, go ahead and try to build it yourselves. We're going to make a VStack with an image, and then a VStack with the title, the subtitle, and then we're going to put the headline kind of right below that. Go ahead and try to build it yourself. If not, I'm going to go do it right now. Let's make a VStack, spacing of 0 and open the brackets. Image loader view and URL string will pass in our image name. The image is optional, so let's do an if let image name, and we'll go ahead and put this in there. The image I want to make a square, so we'll give it an aspect ratio of 1 and we'll make it fit that square. And then around the entire thing, I'm just going to make the preview look like a modal. So let's do a Z stack. Let's do color.gray, ignore safe area. And then let's give the modal padding of 40, just so it looks like it will be on top of the screen here. In this VStack, we'll add another VStack with some spacing of 16. We'll open the brackets. And in here, let's say if let title, as well as if let subtitle, and if let headline. Let's put text with the title. I will copy and paste that and paste that. And then this will be the subtitle and the headline. Let's align these to the leading edge. On the entire VStack here, let's give it a background. So we have a background here. We're going to use the thin material. So the system materials are really cool. I love to use them when we can. The materials are like a little bit transparent, so you can kind of see what's happening behind the modal here. Thin material is usually good. I like using all of the thin materials, ultra thin material. If it's thick, it gets less transparent and it's kind of just not as cool in my mind. These are actually too far apart. Maybe we make this spacing down to like 4. Let's give the title a font of title and a font weight of semi-bold. Let's give the subtitle a font of title 3, and we'll make this a foreground style of secondary. And we'll give the headline a font of maybe sub headline. We'll also make it foreground style of secondary. I don't really care about the content on this modal. The point of this is obviously just that we can build a modal and display it. I think that's much more important than actually building a cool UI here. On the VStack, let's give this a frame with a max width of infinity, and let's align it to the left edge of that, so we push it to the left. But let's give it padding of 24 so that we pop it out from the edges of the modal. The whole modal, obviously we're going to want to add a corner radius, my favorite modifier. Let's go ahead and make it 16. And last but not least, let's add the X button on the top right. So let's do an overlay on top of the entire modal. We'll add an image. Let's use the system name, and we're going to do the xmark.circle.fill. Let's give this a font of title. Just title. Let's give this a foreground style of accent. Actually, not accent. Let's do color.black. I want to make it black in both light and dark mode. I'll make the background here color.red just so that we can see it. I want to add a little bit of padding before that so it's a little bit easier to tap for the user. And then instead of red, we'll make this a tappable background. Let's go ahead and add alignment to the top trailing of the modal. And then let's push it off the edge by maybe 8. So we'll do padding here of 8. Great. Lastly, I want to perform an action when the user clicks the X button. So after the tappable background, but before the padding, we'll make this any button. And we want to pass in an action. This is a reusable component, so we'll just pass in an action. This will be var on X mark, which will be a function that returns void. Let's go ahead and call down here on X mark pressed. I will set it equal to just a blank function for now so that we don't have to set it up in our preview. Let's display a profile modal view on top of our chats view. Let's go back to the chat view. For right now, let's put our VStack inside a ZStack. And then on top, I'm going to add, let's just make sure that we're looking at the right place. Let's add color.black. It should be on top of the entire thing. Black.ignore safe area, cool. All right, so instead of the black screen, let's go ahead and add our profile modal view. Let's push it off the edge of the device. So we're gonna go padding of maybe 40. Now we only wanna render this on the screen when the user actually clicks on the image. So let's go here and set a Boolean. Well, let's call this show profile modal of type bool. Set it equal to false. And then here we're gonna say if show profile modal, put the profile modal on the screen. So it should not be there right now. But let's add an action so that when I click this circle on this image here, the modal appears. So this image, where's that image? It's going to be in our scroll view section, in our chat bubble, inside the chat bubble view. All right, so in the chat bubble view, good thing we have our previews working. We have this circle here. Here's the circle. So let's put the tap gesture only on the loaded version. I don't want to put it on the square rectangle here because then there probably is no image. So here let's do any button, and we're going to use our plain style, and we'll pass back another action. We'll say var, we'll say on image pressed, which will be a function that returns void. And I'm going to make this optional in case we don't want to actually do this for some iteration of the cell, and it will be nil to begin with. And then here we'll call on image pressed, which is optional, and then we'll trigger it if it is there. So if we go back in our chat bubble builder, we're now going to want to update our on image pressed. And let's go forward and then copy this on image pressed and then paste it here as well. And we'll just pass it in one more time. Now, where we initialized the chat bubble view builder back in our chats view, we should now have a bit of a function here on image pressed. And now let's go to the bottom of the code and bottom of the screen, and let's create a private func on avatar image pressed, which is a function. And then here we're going to set show profile modal equal to true. Let's call this from our code up here, pass that in. Hopefully it works. That's great. Now you probably noticed that when we actually display this one, the background actually tints slightly dark gray. Right here we have the background is still white and it's still clickable, obviously. Back here we have another layer that kind of just turns the background a darker color. Let's go ahead and actually add a background color to the modal. Let's put it inside here. So if I click it, it should now display. It looks a little too dark, so let's go opacity of 0.6, and that should be better on the eyes. And now let's add a bit of a transition because the jump to show this modal is a little too aggressive. We want to transition it in from the sides. So let's add here a dot transition. Let's go dot slide. And I think it's still not going to work. Let's click it, and it doesn't work because we need to add animation on that transition. Well, let's make it the bouncy animation on show profile modal. It looks decent, but let's polish it a little bit. On the background, let's give the background a different transition. So the background right now, we could do slide, but that looks a little funky to me. Let's make the background transition maybe any transition opacity with animation of dot smooth. So the background will just fade in basically, and the foreground will slide in, and that looks much better. Let's actually jump back to the profile modal view. I forgot to set up our preview here. Let's make this the modal with image, and I want to do one more for the modal without image. So here we'll do image name equals nil. And so the modal without image should look a little bit different. Actually, that looks fine. We're going to leave it like that. And so now we should be able to build it without an image as well. Let's jump back to our chat view. And we got a couple things to polish here. So firstly, when we click it, we want to dismiss. If I click back here, I want to dismiss the modal, or if I click the X button, I want to dismiss the modal. So in our profile view, we have a on X mark press. And in that function, we'll go ahead and just set show profile modal equal to false. So the X button should now work. Cool. And also on the black background, let's give that a dot on tap gesture. And we'll just say show profile modal equals to false. All right, you can see that when we do close it, the animation looks a little funky. This kind of appears before it leaves the screen. Let's put our entire if statement inside a Z stack so that this Z stack always renders on the screen, and this Z stack is always above the V stack. So basically the Z index of this stack will always have a higher value than this Z stack. So that should fix a little bit of that fade out animation here. And if it doesn't, let's go ahead and make this a Z index of 999 so that it's always at the top. And that looks a little bit better now. I will put the animation actually now on the Z stack so that it's specific to the profile modal. A couple more things we've got to do before we finish up this video. On the profile modal, let's put in the actual content for the avatar here. So let's go ahead here and say if let avatar, and then we'll put the avatar modal on the screen. And so then in here, I should be able to add, let's get the profile modal initializer up. Option enter, triple click, control M. Let's make this the avatar.profile image name, avatar.name, avatar. This is the character option dot raw value dot capitalized, avatar dot character description, and then on X mark pressed, we'll just go ahead and set show profile modal to false. Let's delete this and make sure that our avatar is showing up here. Great. Next, you probably noticed that on the first time that I click this, when I click this, the image loads in really funky. It's basically like the image itself is not animating in from the side of the screen. When I click it a second time, it does, but the first time it does not. Let's do it one more time. You'll see it as soon as I click it. It's really funky. I have actually debugged this for hours to try to figure out what is happening. And it is actually a SwiftUI bug. And it has something to do with loading asynchronous images. but it is actually not specific to SD web image or how we're loading in the image. And to prove that to you guys, let's jump to our image loader view. And if I make the background rectangle 0.5 and I just comment out the overlay here, if we go back into our code here, it should now render the modal full. It should now render the full modal. And there is no animation glitch when we go and do that. So the problem must be within the actual image loading itself. So coming back to here, I've debugged this for hours, and I don't think most people will actually figure out how to solve it. This problem exists inside SD web image, but also inside Kingfisher and also inside async image. And it just has something to do with SwiftUI transitions while the images are loading. But I did find one quick solution that we're going to implement now, which is actually just adding one modifier called drawing group. So the drawing group is it will composite the view's contents into an off-screen image before display. Basically, it's going to render before it displays. So it has a bit of a performance impact, but it forces the view to render all of this together before it actually displays on the screen. So if I go back to our chat view now and I click it, you'll notice that the image now pops in nice and smooth, which is awesome. Drawing group is probably a lesser known modifier. I didn't even know about it until I actually came across this problem. But there is a performance implication. So now all of the images in our app are going to have a slight millisecond slower render because of that drawing group. So when I go to the image loader view, I actually only want to add this modifier for that one instance of the image. So up here, let's just create a variable called force transition animation of type bool and set it equal to false for default. And now I just want to add this only if this is true. So most of the time, we're not going to actually make a drawing group. So we could do an if-else statement, and we could say zstack if force transition else, and then put the drawing group on the screen. But this is annoying. This is way too much code. So really what we want to do is a modifier that says show the content or show the content with this modifier. So let's go ahead and undo that. Let's create a extension of view. And let's create a custom function view modifier here called if. I'll make it generic. So we're going to say if satisfies condition. And then we'll open the brackets. If satisfies condition. And so we'll pass in a condition of type bool. And we'll just make this an underscore for the external name. And then we'll return some view. And in here, we're going to say if condition. So if this is true, then let's return self with the modifier, which we'll do in a second. Else, we'll just return self as is. These are going to be two different views, so we'll make sure this is a view builder. And then let's transform this self using the modifier. So when I go and I add this, it's going to look like this, dot if satisfies condition. And I'm going to pass in a force transition animation. And so if this is true, I then want to have a closure here where I can then take this version of it, so the content in this version, and then if it's true, I can go ahead and add a drawing group. So this needs to be a closure that we get back. So here we're going to make this, let's call it transform, and this will be a function that returns some view. Now the transform function needs to accept self, right? So we're going to call transform and pass self back in. So we're going to pass the current view back in. This function here then needs to accept some sort of content, and we'll call it self. Let's go ahead and make sure this works now. So let's jump back to our chat view. Let's jump to the profile modal view. For this image name, let's go ahead and do force transition. Let's set it equal to true. Let's go to the chat view and see if it works. That looks very smooth. And then let's set it equal to false for a second. Or actually, let's just delete it for a second. And now it should be broken again. Let's just make sure it's broken. Great. All right, so now we know that on this image, we're going to set this as equal to true. I'll triple click and Control M. Let's go back to our image loader view. And let's just move this if satisfies condition to another file. I'll cut it. I will Command Shift O, and let's open up the view plus ext. And then in here, we're just going to paste in our if satisfies condition view modifier. I will note that this modifier specifically is kind of frowned upon by SwiftUI. We want to use this very sparingly, because if this condition were to change while the screen is rendered, this and this, when it changes between these two, is going to re-render the entire view. So basically, anytime you're using this condition, almost all the time, this should be a Boolean that does not change while it is rendered on the screen. It can, but it's going to re-render this entire view. So in our case, it's only going to be true or only going to be false, and it's totally fine. But I would be very careful going ahead and using this everywhere in your code base. Use this sparingly and sort of as a last resort. Let's jump back in. This should now work. And the last thing we'll do in this video is go ahead and make this reusable, because this is cool. But what if I want to show a modal on another screen? And the bug is back. So let's go ahead and make sure that this is set to true. And now we should be ready to rock and roll. Let's go ahead and make this reusable. So I'm going to copy this. Let's open up our components section here. And in our modals section, our modals folder, let's go ahead and right click and create a new file from template. It'll be a SwiftUI view, and let's just call this modal support view. Let's click create. Inside here, I'm going to paste in our Z stack. First and foremost, we don't want our generic modal support view to be coupled to the avatar modal. So we should just not have this modal at all. Instead, we want to pass in some content. So we'll just call this content. And so up here, let's pass in a view builder, var content, which will be some view. And we know from past videos that we cannot pass in some view here. Instead, we should use a generic. So let's make this content, which is anything that conforms to view. And then we'll just call this content here. So now we can put content on the screen. Secondly, we need a Boolean for whether or not it's going to show. We'll say var show modal of type bool. All right, show modal here, and show modal here. Now we cannot assign show modal back to false because this is just a Boolean, but we need to make this not only gettable, but also settable, which means that this should be a binding Boolean. Down here, let's create a private struct called preview view of type view. Every view has a body. We'll create an @state private var show modal of type bool equals false. And then on here, let's make a button that says click me. And then when we click, we will show modal, set it equal to true. And then let's make this a Z stack. And we'll say, and then let's add a modal support view on top. We'll bind to the show modal, and let's just put text that says hi. Maybe we give it a background of color.red so that we can see it. And then let's put our preview view on the screen. And the modal is appeared. That looks good. Let's give the modal a .transition of slide. Cool. Now you'll notice that the modal is only popping in from 4 pixels away. So if this was text, we would see it more. It only pops in from the edge of the frame of the modal, but it doesn't pop in from the edge of the device. You see how it's exiting, but it only exits to here. So what we want to do, the problem here is that the content, we want to make sure that this content extends all the way to the edges of the device. So let's give this a frame with a max width of infinity. While we're at it, let's double check that it also has a max height of infinity, and we'll make it ignore the safe area, so it's really just full screen. So now it should come in all the way from the sides of the device, which looks much better. Lastly, let's go ahead and refactor this so that we can actually just do an overlay and put the modal support view as the overlay, and we don't need a Z stack. That should work. Let's go ahead and make this a frame with a max width of infinity and a max height of infinity. Just a big screen. There we go. And then lastly, let's make a convenience view modifier because this might be hard to remember what to do. So let's create an extension of view. We'll say func show modal. That will be a function that returns some view, and we will return self with this overlay. Let's cut it, paste it here. We need a binding, so here let's pass in show modal, which is a binding of Boolean. And then here we also want to customize what content we're going to show. So this will be a view builder, just like above. That is called content, which is a function that returns some view. So now we should be able to put the content, sorry, let's put the colon there, content on the screen, and let's put the content here, and the content is a function. This is no longer a binding property wrapper, but a binding Boolean, so I can just call show modal. Here's what it looks like on one line. Pretty cool code. Then last but not least, we'll just call .show modal, binding to show modal, and then our content will just be our text. As a better example, let's maybe put in a rounded rectangle. Corner radius of 30. Let's give it padding of 40, and maybe padding vertical of another 100, so it's pushed off the top and the bottom. And then we'll give it a tap gesture to show modal equal to false. So from here, I should now be able to get my whole screen going. All right, let's get rid of our background red. That should not be it. And I actually don't want the transition to be in there either. So we should be able to customize the transition when we go and render it here. So if I go slide, that should work. Great. Let's try another one. Let's do .move, maybe move from the .top edge. See how that goes. And just like that, we have our reusable modal modifier. And that looks really cool. Let's end this video by just using that in our actual code. So let's go back to the chat view. So now rather than having to do this every time, we'll just come down here and we'll just do a quick, maybe we'll do it after these alerts here. We'll do a show modal. Let's bind to our, what are we doing? Show profile modal. Click enter on the content. Let's get the modal now that we want, which is up here. So it's this if statement, if avatar show modal. Let's cut that, paste that down here. And then at the top, we no longer need to worry about any of this code. So I'll just go ahead and delete it. And we actually don't even need to worry about this Z stack here. I'll just paste the V stack back as it was at the beginning. Last but not least, I'm just going to make at the bottom here, let's do where is it? Let's put it here. Private func profile modal. We'll pass in an avatar of type avatar model. Return us some view. Let's take our avatar code here. I'll cut this. Let's add in here the profile modal. We'll pass in the avatar. Profile modal and pass in the avatar. So now this is all the code that we really need to show the modal. And let's make sure it works. And it looks pretty cool. Just one quick bit of polish before we end. Let's make sure that the black background has a .z index of, let's give this 1, and then let's give the content 2. So the content is always above the black background. That looks a little bit more polished and really nice. Cool. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. That was some pretty cool code again. We did custom alerts, now we did custom modals, and now we have this reusable components that you guys can just copy and paste into all of your projects going forward. This, in my mind, is the future of Swift UI, because once you build stuff like this and you have these reusable components, it becomes so easy to build screens so fast. Next time we want a modal, we're going to make a Boolean, we're going to call show modal, and then within 3 seconds, we have our modal on the screen. Super easy, super fast, and all it takes is a little bit of custom Swift UI code. Hopefully through this course, you guys are going to get better at doing stuff like this yourself and building this yourself. But even if you're not, I mean, most of what we're writing is just directly reusable to your own apps. So even if you can't do it yourself, hopefully it helps you by just copying and pasting into your project. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next video.